Me too. And there's no way out of it. You're going to die. I'm going to die. It's going to happen. And what difference does it make if it's tomorrow or in 80 years? Much sooner in your case. Do you know how fast time goes? I was 6, like yesterday.
Me too.
I'm going to die. You are going to die. What else is there to be afraid of?
Oh, man. Can anybody tell me the movie? What about Bob? That's so good. You know, first hour, nobody knew? Okay, and you young people are like, what about Bob? So let me just explain real quickly. Bob, who is Bill Murray, is a guy who's afraid of everything, including death. And through a series of humorous events, he ends up staying the night at his psychiatrist's house, Dr. Leo Marvin. And Leo Marvin has a son named Siggy, and somehow he ends up sleeping in the same bedroom with Siggy, which now today feels a little weird. In the 90s, that past is normal for some reason. I don't know. Strange. But during that conversation, I love it. It's like Siggy, who's like a preteen, has no problem like talking about death. And here's Bob like all scared about it. But I love what Siggy says, right? He says, you are going to die. I'm going to die. It's going to happen. Now, I don't know how many pastors start with this but welcome, right? Listen, I understand, like, we're going to be talking about death this morning, and the question is not, like, will we die? I'll have to break the news to you. There's a 100% death rate here in America. That we're probably going to die. Unless Jesus comes back, this is going to happen. So it's not a question of if we will die, but will we die well is really the question of this morning. That's what we're going to talk about for the next few weeks in our series, Dying Well. And if you're new with us, you came on a great Sunday because we're starting a series, but we don't always talk about death, but we wanted to because I think it's a conversation worth having, even though not many people have it today. And so if you check out, if you are on the younger side of life going, why do I even want to think about this? I got decades and decades and decades ahead of me. Here's what I really want you to know this morning. Even the youngest of you this morning, this is what I want you to know. Dying well begins long, 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 long before we actually die. Here's another thing to think about. Dying well is not something you figure out at the end of your life. It's actually the result of the person you've been becoming your entire life. And so whether you're 15 or 105 or 96, happy birthday, Myrna. Listen, it's something that we need to be thinking about. But I'll be honest, again, I don't really even like talking about death, especially preaching about death, because I don't know if you know this about preachers. Whatever they normally preach on is what happens to them later that week. Okay, so if I preach on patience, I just know I'm going to be stuck in a line somewhere for 2 hours. I just know that's going to happen. So I am taking my life I'm risking it here talking about death because I don't know what's going to happen this week. So if I die this week, you're welcome, okay? I sacrificed for you. I know, right? But that's how I think. Now, listen, I know we don't like talking about death, and the reason why is because it's not something that is in our purview very much anymore. Oftentimes, we like to just kind of dismiss this idea of death and not really think about it, and those who are dying, we kind of we send them into a nursing home or hospice. It's kind of out of sight. But that's not the way it's normally have been, all throughout history. In fact, here's a stat, at the beginning of the 20th century, fewer than 15% of all deaths occurred in an institution such as a hospital or a nursing home, which means most people grew up watching their grandparents age and then die in the home, and they experience that. And it shapes them and it forms them, and it's something that sticks with them. And oftentimes now we don't have that. Now, I'm not saying, anything negative about hospitals or hospice or nursing homes. People there do great work, bringing comfort and, compassion. That's not what I'm saying. All I'm saying is most of us it's not in our purview. And if it's out of sight, it's out of mind, and we just don't think about it. And because we don't think about it, because we don't experience it like, used to, we're just not often prepared for it. In fact, if you ask people today, how would you like to die, which is a great, start conversation at dinner time, like, what do you think they would say? Like, how do you want to die? That's right, in our sleep, right? I want to die peacefully in my sleep. I want it to be quick. I don't even want to know it's coming. I just want to be like, I just want to die peacefully. But if you went back like 400 years, let's say, in history, Christians in that time did not think about death the way we think about death. They actually saw sudden death as something, like one of the worst possible ways to die. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Book of Common Prayer. But in it, there's a prayer called the prayer of litany, and the litany just means like you just request something over and over again. It's something that you pray over and over. But here is a part of that prayer. It says, "Spare us, O Lord, from lightning and tempest just means like severe thunderstorms. From lightning and tempest, from earthquakes, fire, and flood." This is a great prayer for Californians, just to, like if you're from California. "But from plague, pestilence, famine, from battle and murder," but check this out, "and from" what? "Sudden death." And this is not sudden death like the good kind when your favorite team is playing another team and they go to overtime so you get to watch them more. Like, that's not the kind of sudden death. This is like unprepared sudden death. And look at this, on the same shelf as like murder. Like, I don't want to be murdered and I don't want to die suddenly. Good Lord, deliver us. And it's like, why? Well, because they didn't want to die unprepared. They didn't want to die in a way that didn't give them time to reconcile with people. They didn't want to die so suddenly that they couldn't get their house in order and make sure there was provisions for their family after they were gone. They thought sudden death was one of the worst things. And so Christians historically didn't just pray to live well, they prayed to die well. It's interesting, it's fascinating. I say it this way, in the past, people preferred dying well to dying suddenly. So, with that in mind, what does it mean to die well? What does it mean to die well? And why are we talking about it? And how does this relate to our faith and following Jesus? Well, that's what we're going to talk about for the next few weeks. So if you have your Bibles this morning, I really encourage you to turn with me to John chapter 21. John chapter 21, I'll give you a little bit of context before we read it. This is after Peter denies knowing Jesus 3 different times. Okay, this is what happens before Jesus is crucified. Peter says, "I don't know the guy, I don't know the guy, I don't know the guy." After the resurrection, Jesus comes back and he has breakfast with the boys on the beach, and he knows Peter had denied him 3 times, and so he knows how Peter's feeling, so he restores Peter by saying, "Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me?" That whole thing, if you ever read it. But then after that, he has this interesting conversation, this ending of the conversation with Peter that I'm sure just kind of rocked Peter's world if you think about it. But here's what Jesus tells Peter about what was going to come. He says, "Very truly I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and you went where you wanted." And as a teenager, we're like, "Yep, that's life. Like give me liberty," right? But he says, "Listen, but when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go." And it says that Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, "Follow me." Now, this passage does not get a lot of airtime. I don't know how many sermons I've ever heard on this passage, but this is huge for Peter if you think about it. What Jesus is saying is this: I got some good news and I got some hard news. I like hard news better than bad news because oftentimes God turns bad things into good. But it's always hard, right? So I got some good news and I got some hard news. Good news, you're going to live till you're an old man. Right, and that's like, and we know like decades later, like 3 decades later, he's like in his 60s by the time Peter dies. He's like, good news, you're gonna live to see old age. Good news. Hard news is that eventually what's going to happen is you're not going to be able to dress yourself, meaning you're not going to be as agile or you have the abilities or the freedom, and you're going to be stretch your arms out and they're going to take you where you don't want to go. And I was reading this whole passage, and I was like, man, this sounds a lot like what happens when we age and when we get older. Like eventually, most of us, if we live to be such a age, we won't be able to button our shirts anymore. We won't be able to put our tennis shoes on anymore. We won't be able to do things we used to. We're going to lose our ability. We're going to lose our mobility, and we're going to lose our independence. And people are going to take us where we don't want to go. And where's that? Let's just be honest. Probably a nursing home. Nobody's ideal dream is to end up in a nursing home. But that's kind of like aging when I'm reading this, right? Now, why do you think Jesus told Peter that? Like he gave him like a glimpse into his future. Like, he had the crystal ball. He says, this is how you're going to die. Why do you think he told Peter that? To scare him? To depress him? I don't think so. I think Jesus told him this to prepare him. To prepare him. In fact, I say it this way, anticipation drives preparation. If I told you it was going to rain later today, what would you get? What would you bring with you? An umbrella. You would anticipate the rain and you would prepare accordingly. Jesus is telling Peter this to prepare him for what is to come, even though it's not for another 3 decades. Okay? So you young people, like, why do I want to hear this? Why do I not? Like Jesus, like, hey, like Peter was a young guy, but he's still trying to prepare him now. He's giving, actually, I think, a very important gift to Peter. He is preparing Peter to age faithfully because he knows eventually how he's going to die is going to be hard. And he needs to know that now to start preparing now. And I realize most of us, again, are probably not going to die anytime soon. I hope not. And we joke about these things, but I hope not. I hope not. I hope not. But that doesn't mean we need to start getting ready now. We need to start preparing now. Now, you might be wondering, well, Dave, why do you even want to talk about this? Like, how do you get these thoughts in your head to start, a series like this? I get that question sometimes. I read a lot, and I like to read different books and different authors and outside of our normal boxes. I read this book called Sacred Fire. It was written by Ronald Rolheiser. He's actually a Catholic priest, but he doesn't bring a lot of Catholicism into the book, right? And so I recommend this book. It's actually a 3-part volume work that he's done. I just recommend this book because this book covers really the first book and the third book. I've read them all 3, but just if you're looking just to read a book, that's a good book to read. And in this book, he basically lays out the life of a disciple. What does discipleship look like in 3 stages? And these 3 stages I thought were just kind of interesting to me. Here's what he says. He says, here's the first stage we go through. First stage is between like 0 and young adulthood. This stage can be identified as the struggle to get your life together. Okay? This is what we do when we're young. Right? And we're full of energy, he says. We're full of ambition. And what is this energy trying to do? It's trying to drive us out of our home to find a home. It's trying to drive us out of the basement, hopefully, and into our own home so that we can have our own family and own life and own career. And he says that is hard. That's a struggle to try to figure life out of where I belong and who I'm going to call family and all that kind of stuff. Like, that is hard. He says, but that is a short period of time. He says, after you get over that hump, he says, for the most of your life, it's going to be in the second phase. And this phase goes from young adulthood all the way up to almost to your death. He says, this phase can be called the struggle to give your life away. He says, now that you're out of the home and you found a home and maybe you get married and maybe you find a career, now you're in your productive years. Now you're in what he calls your generative years, where you're producing, where you're making money and you're earning things and you're acquiring things. And now you're trying to figure out, okay, I have this stuff and I have how do I give my life away? How do I give my, these things away? What do I do with my life? Find meaning and purpose beyond just producing things. And so he says, this is a big, part of the journey. But then he says, and this is where I want to go to, he says, there's a third part. And this third piece, we don't often talk about. We don't prepare people for. There's usually not classes for this. There's classes more for this, and there's classes for this. But he says when you get to this phase, there's not a lot of classes. But this is called the struggle to give your death away. In fact, he says your death is maybe your greatest and your last and greatest gift that you can give to the world. And we're going to talk more about that in the next couple weeks. But I love this idea, like it not only just acknowledges that we're going to die, but it acknowledges like, hey, like we need to prepare ourselves. If that's the finish line, then wherever I'm at, I want to know what that is so I can start getting ready for it now. And I love this idea of like, hey, once you get here, oftentimes that's retirement age, And then we think in our retirement years, we're just going to kind of ride off into the sunset. And it's all going to be fine. And we're just going to fade away. But that's not how it works. Can I get an amen for anybody? Like, right? You guys can start amening on this anytime. You older folks, please. But this is not the way it works. God still wants to work in you and through you and for you, all that stuff into not just your retirement years, but even into your last days on earth. This is a discipleship issue. Why are we talking about this today? Because I believe this is a discipleship issue. And I love you guys as your pastor. I care about you now, and I hope to set you up well in the future. Wherever you're at, I hope you remember this series when you are at your deathbed going, oh man, Pastor Dave talked about this stuff, right? I want you to remember this. And so this morning, I want to talk about actually the positives of aging. The positives of aging. And I understand nobody wants to grow old and nobody wants to, die. I get that. But here's the reality when you think about death. Death is both a curse and a blessing. We totally understand the curse part of this, right? We understand God's original design and God's final design does not include death, right? Death is an enemy. It is something that it just kind of, through sin has found its way into this world and we hate it. It's a curse. But it's actually, in a way, also a blessing. Here's what one author says. This is John Wyatt. I also read this book called Dying Well. He says this: the biblical narrative makes plain that to live forever in a fallen state is not a blessing, but a curse. In other words, God knew after we sinned, and now sin has entered the world, and death and decay has entered the world. He's like, I don't want you guys to live in this body that's decaying and in this world that's decaying. I don't want you to live that way forever. And so it's a curse right now because of that. And so that's why he guards the tree of life. So in God's mysterious providence, death may on occasion change from being an enemy. It may become, he says, a release from an existence trapped in a fallen, decaying body. In C.S. Lewis's wonderful words, he calls death a severe mercy. He goes on to say, Christian attitudes to death must always reflect this strange ambivalence, meaning there's a blessing side and a curse side. It's like we got to hold that in tension. And even though human death is fundamentally an evil to be fought against, a reality that must never be sought intentionally, we are never saying it's okay to take your own life or to seek out death. We're not saying that at all. It may also at times be accepted as a sign of God's mercy. And I have experienced that myself with my mom. And many of you know my mom's story that she had dementia for 6 or 7 years. And we watched her begin to fade away and diminish. And not just her mind, but her body. And eventually, it got so hard to watch her and to watch my dad care for her that my prayers had to shift from, God, would you please heal my mom? To God, would you please take my mom? Take her home with you. And that was a hard prayer to pray. But at the end of the day, I was praying for God's mercy. Mercy, mercy, mercy. And so when she finally died, it was a totally, as you can realize, a bittersweet moment. It was bittersweet. It was a severe mercy. And as much as death can feel kind of unnatural, I get that, and aging can feel, natural up to a point, but then unnatural. It's interesting, when it comes to aging, James Hillman, who's not even a Christ follower, not even a Christian, makes this kind of observation about aging. He says this: when it comes to aging, I am led to assume that there is intelligence in life that intends aging just as it intends growth in youth. In other words, it seems like he says, from his perspective, it seems like almost God has kind of put this in part of the plan for us to age and to grow old. Well, why? Because death is not just a curse and a blessing. Aging is both a curse and a blessing. And we know the curse part of aging too. Listen, I've only begun to experience the downside of aging. But let me tell you, after 40, guys, really is no joke. It is no joke. I remember in my 20s hearing 40-year-olds who seemed so old to me, like complain about being in their 40s, and I'll be like, oh, so sad, whatever. I'm here now, guys. It is no joke. Listen, can I be real with you? Some of my complaints at 40, I can't eat after 8:30 or I get acid reflux. I cannot drink any liquids after 7:30. And you guys know why. Around 4 months ago, suddenly there was a switch in my body that I can no longer have dairy, okay? Like, what happened? I love dairy, I love milk, I love cheese, I love ice cream. And suddenly, somebody found a switch and switched it. I was eating lasagna a couple days ago, thinking it was just gonna be a small amount of lasagna. I was like 3 bites in, and my body was like, no, sir. Like, we ain't having any more of that, right? Okay? It happens, and it's no fun. It's no fun. But here's the reality too. Aging, it's hard, but only gets harder with what? With age, okay? So how is this good news, Dave? Like, how is this? We're getting there. Hold on. All right. I love how Ronald Rolheiser describes getting older. He says this. He says, the best wines have to be aged in cracked old barrels. Okay? There's something about getting older in cracked old barrels that make you actually better inwardly. A lot of you have heard this. A lot of you have probably said this line. Aging is not for the faint of heart, right? But here's the deal. It is for the forming of the heart. It is for the forming of your heart. It is for the forming of your character. Let me tell you a story real quick. I spent a week last year on sabbatical in a monastery in Kentucky. Beautiful property, 1,500 plus acres of woods and farmland. And there is this monastery that's like an old medieval castle. It's huge. And they allow you to go there for free. You just give a donation, and it's wonderful. And they leave you alone, and the monks kind of do their own thing, and they practice a lot of silence. They don't take a vow of silence, but they don't really talk to each other, and they certainly don't talk to guests unless you really want to talk to them. And I kind of really wanted to talk to some monks while I was down there. And so I was on a hike, and I put together all the questions at the beginning of my journey down there. I was like, I'm just going to, if I ever bump into a monk while I'm here, I have my questions set. And so I found out I can talk to one monk. He was 90 years old, and I just rattled off questions for an hour and a half. He probably thought I was really weird, like, why do you have all these questions? But then I met a 95-year-old monk who was doing the check-in. And he was, I don't know if you guys know Thomas Merton, but he was a writer and a monk that lived there. This 95-year-old was a pallbearer to Thomas Merton, so that was his claim to fame. And so we talked about that. But at the end of my journey, my time there, the last day, I was feeling a little bit curious. And I just kind of wanted to wander around this old giant medieval castle-looking thing. And I probably went places I probably shouldn't have gone, I'll be honest. But I was just curious, and I was like, I was going to find. And so I make my way down these winding stairs, and this room begins to open up, and there's this big circular table with chairs, and there was bookshelf. It almost looked like a library. And I walked in, and I was like looking around, and suddenly I hear this, "Can I help you?" I was like, oh no, busted. I was like, oh, I must have wandered in the wrong place. He's like, that's okay, come and sit down. And so this monk was he was the leader of the singers. And I saw him all week during the prayer times and singing times. And he was so somber, he was so reserved. But in that moment, all of a sudden, he just lit up. He was like, come on and sit down. And he would, he would laugh like that. And his name was Brother Luke. And Brother Luke started talking to me about all kinds of things, but he was describing one of the monks that was there for a long time, and how this monk used to be a certain way, but then as he got older and got into old age, he described this monk, and I'll never forget how he described it. How he described him. He said this, his edges were smooth. And he kind of just did one of these things with his arms. He's like, his edges were smooth. There was no, bite to him. There was no harshness to him. There was no jaggedness to him. His edges over time just got smoothed. I love that because when we're younger, trials and hardships can really make us edgy and sharp and harsh and brash. But if we allow God over time, those same kind of trials and tribulations can actually smooth out those edges. And it can mellow the soul. And it can mature us. And it can work on our character. See, aging, it's hard, but it has also a way of smoothing out your edges. Ronald Rollhauser says it this way. He says, as we age, our task, if we allow God to do his work, is not productivity. That was the second stage of life, right? And be productive, he would say. But as we grow old, it's not about productivity anymore. It's about reflection. And it's not about utility of what you can and cannot do. It's about character. It's about God forming you into more of his image. And this is what the Apostle Paul says. He said something that has always haunted me because this is just a reality that we're all going to face. He says, though outwardly, he's just being honest, though outwardly we are wasting away. And we are, in a sense, wasting away. Yet inwardly, we are being renewed day by day. And this outward wasting, I was thinking about this, and I had an old pastor talk about this. He says, yeah, getting up is harder and harder to do as you get older. And there's more pain, and there's more, things that aren't working, and there's more loss in your life. And it's just harder on the body. He says the only thing that we need to focus on is we can't do anything about that. But he says, if we allow God, he says, to be renewing our inner spirit day after day after day. This is what Paul prayed for. In the book of Ephesians, a letter to the church of Ephesus, he's like, I'm praying not for your protection, not for your whatever. I'm praying that you would be strengthened, that God would strengthen you in your inner being. Your inner being matters more than your outer being. We're so focused on trying to keep up with our outer shell and going to the gym and making sure, and that's all good stuff. But at the end of the day, that's all still wasting away. What really, really matters is our inner being. And I love part in the book that I read that was this idea of when we're wasting away, we're getting thinner on the outside. Our shells in a sense, are getting thinner. But he says that's really good news because the light of Christ can shine that much more out of us as we get older. I say it this way, the older we get, the more our character begins to show, right? And that can be a good thing or that can be a not so good thing, depending, I guess, on your character. But our inner life is not formed over a period of just a few days before we die. Our inner life must start, our focus on that has to start really today. So here's the question. What kind of older person are you becoming? Because we're all becoming older people. No matter how old you are, you're becoming older. What kind of older person are you becoming? And there's a guy named Richard Rohr. I don't really agree with a lot of that stuff he says theologically, but he categorizes people into 3 different categories, which I thought was kind of humorous and funny. And so here they are. He says, when you grow older, you either become a pathetic old fool, an angry old fool, or a holy old fool. Okay? He says the hard news is you'll become a what? An old fool. So just accept it. Okay? We're just going to go there. But he says, you can become a pathetic old fool. And he says a pathetic old fool is someone who doesn't really act their age. Now, I understand, there's always a good idea to have a young person mentality, to hang out with youth and do all that stuff. But he says there's a point where you just kind of have to accept your limitations. And so a pathetic old fool would be someone who just would not give up the keys, right? Because, they can keep driving. Or they keep climbing that ladder, even though you told them, don't climb the ladder anymore. Stop acting like you're 20. That's not cool. You can get really hurt. He says there's also the angry old fool. Anybody know any angry old men? How many of you are angry old? I'm just joking. We have a few. I won't name names. Right there, that's one. But no, I'm just joking. Tony raised his hand. But listen, it's easy to get angry. Because things stop working the way they ought to or, used to, and there's loss and there's pain and there's heartache, and it's just like, I'm just angry at the world. I'm angry at God. I'm angry with all this. It's just so easy to get angry. But he says, instead of being a pathetic old fool or angry old fool, what we need to become are holy old fools. And you might be asking, well, what is a holy old fool? Here's what he says. A holy old fool is someone just as marginalized by age, health, and society as everyone else. Like they're exactly the same. They're going through it all. But he says, who has made peace with that. They had made peace with their age. They have made peace with where they're at. And I've just found, like over the years, I got to keep making peace with my body. I got to keep making peace with my reality. Because it's different and it changes and it's going to keep changing. And that's okay. That's okay. So how do we become holy old fools? Where in the book, Ronald Rolheiser points to different movements, different shifts that we have to make in our hearts. And here's what he says. I'll just give you 4 of them. He says we need to make these shifts, first of all, from resentment to gratitude. Why resentment? Because when you get older, you're going to look back on your life, and there are going to be things that you wish you would have done or you would hope you had done, and you never got a chance to do it. And that can lead to resentment. He says you have to not focus on what you couldn't do, but what God has given you to gratitude, what you did accomplish, what God worked through you, and you got to focus on that. He says you need to move from bitterness because people are hard and they're going to hurt you and there's going to be wounds and you can hold on to that bitterness, or he says you can move towards forgiveness. And we're going to talk more about that next week with Jesus because he powerfully demonstrated that with his dying. He says you have to move from control, and I don't know who doesn't love control. I love control. I love having the car wheel. I just love that. But we have to move from control to surrender, and then from achievement to fruitfulness. Meaning achievements are what we accomplishment, but our fruitfulness is the long-term effect of our achievements on other people. In other words, we have to start thinking about our legacy. We're going to talk about that in week 3. Our legacy is so important of what we're leaving behind. And so one day, we're going to reach a point. We're going to reach a moment when the things that we used to do that gave us a definition, identity, and value, we're no longer going to be able to do. And it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard. But that's part of life right now. But when that moment comes, who are you going to be? Who are you going to be? And who you're going to be is really who you are becoming right now. Going back to the story with Jesus and Peter, when Jesus told Peter, here's how you're going to die. Again, it wasn't to frighten him. It wasn't to, ruin the moment and, bring everything down. He said this to prepare him so that he could do something with his death. You guys remember what he said? He said this. Jesus said it to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would what? Glorify God. Glorify God. If you want to know what dying well we mean by dying well, it's a way of dying and a way of aging that gives glory to God, that points back to him, his character, his patience, his kindness, his gentleness, his forgiveness. We need to be moving in that direction if we want to glorify God, and it doesn't happen overnight. Listen, one day there will be a moment when your strength fades, and someone else is going to have to tie your shoes, and someone else is going to have to put your shirt on, and someone is going to lead you where you do not want to go. In that moment, you're going to have to make a decision with what you do with that. And I'll just tell you, it's going to be so much harder if you start thinking about it then. But if you start realizing this, that the person that you have been becoming your entire life will finally be revealed. If you understand that now, then you start to be prepared now. You start to work at it now. You start to think about it now. And here's the cool part about Peter. We don't actually know how Peter actually died, although we do have some tradition. We have some writings after the Bible in the 2nd and 3rd century about possibly how Peter died. And the story goes something like this. Origen told us this version of it, and he got this from Eusebius, but he says, Peter was crucified at Rome with his head downwards, as he himself had desired to suffer. In other words, the story goes, Peter was going to be crucified for his faith, but he says, I don't want to be crucified the way our Lord was crucified. Flip me upside down. And you imagine just how much more excruciating that was. Now, I don't know if that actually happened or not, but we have pretty good idea that Peter was martyred. In fact, Jesus, what his statement tells us, like it was not going to be good. And he was going to be taken where he did not want to go. And the question is, how do you become a person like that? To face that kind of death, to face that kind of hardship, to face that kind of pain. How do you become a person like that? It wasn't overnight that Peter got this way. Peter died this way because he was preparing himself all along for this one moment. And he knew, yes, his preaching was great, and his preaching glorified God, but he knew that his death was also a possible way of glorifying God if he allowed it. So what do we do with all this? It's a lot. You guys still with me? Okay, we're almost there. I know death is never fun to talk about, but what do we do with this? First, start paying attention to your inner life now. Here's my question for you. What are you doing to strengthen your inner being? I know you guys go to the gym. A lot of you guys go to the gym. A lot of you ladies go to the gym to strengthen your outer being, and that's great. I love going to the gym. Can't you tell? No matter what I do, I can't really build muscle. It's frustrating, but because I'm wasting away, right? Anyways, what are you doing to strengthen your inner being? That's some inner thoughts there. What are you doing to strengthen your inner being? What are you doing with, your quiet time? What are you doing to help strengthen that, to shapen that, to focus more on these movements, right? And what are these movements again? We have to start practicing these movements from resentment to gratitude. Which one of these do you need to move to? Which one of these do not right now represent the character in your heart? Or when someone thinks about you, they're like, oh, that's not a person who expresses gratitude very often. Which one of those are like, I need to work on that. I need to focus on that. I don't want to be a person who dies bitter and resentful and trying to control everything, even though I'm not really in control at all, and still talking about my achievements. It's all about me and not about my legacy. Third thing, start living with the end in mind. Start living with the idea of there's the finish line. But if that's the finish line, what do I need to do now to prepare for that? In the book of Psalms, there's one psalm that is attributed to Moses that is so good. In Psalm 90, I think it says something like this, like, teach me to number the number of my days. Teach me the number of my days that I may gain a heart of wisdom. Like, God, help me keep the end in mind, in other words, so that I have enough wisdom to know what to do with it now. Listen, dying well begins long, long, long before you die, guys. It just does. And Siggy was right. You're going to die. I'm going to die. It's going to happen. The question is not if we will die. The question is, will we die well? And it starts now. Would you pray with me? God, thank you that you've preserved these texts, these conversations, that we can look back and glean from it, the wisdom and the power of your words. And I just pray, Lord, and I know this is a hard topic, this is a heavy topic, this brings up a lot of probably emotion in people, memories in people. I pray that your Spirit right now would bring comfort where comfort is needed. And I pray that you would fill people with hope where right now there is a lot of fear, because you conquered death. And I can't wait to celebrate that on Easter, and we celebrate that every Sunday, that you conquered death. But God, meet us in this space right now. Tend to our hearts the only way that you can. If there's something that we need to change, if there's something we need to confess, help us to do that. But God, help us to teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom here on this stuff. God, I thank you for our very young in our church, and I thank you for the very old in our church. And it's all part of this process of following you. That's where the fullness of life comes from. So as we lean in, God, I just pray that we would not back away, that we would lean in and learn from you how to live well and how to die well. And we pray all this in Jesus' precious name.